Yes, just
there we go, we're live.
Okay, brilliant. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Spotlight Week and to this Planning Employers question and answer session. Especially like to welcome our planning employers, and they are Litchfields, Arups, David Locks, Pegasus Group and Headley Planning. And Joe from Headley Planning is here with two hats on, also representing the RTPI in the region. My name is Teresa Strachan. I'm just coordinating the employability events this year, and I've had lots of discussions with our employers today already. And I think it's because of their enthusiasm wanting to get involved, understanding how they can promote links with the university that has enabled this event to take place. Okay, so this week we've already seen a number of our alumni sessions being pre-recorded, our chats with our alumni, and these are being shared on our YouTube channel. Today and yesterday is the focus of our planning employers, and we want to sort of look a little bit more in depth as to those questions that our students are asking us about how to embark upon that process and working with employers, thinking about how they prepare themselves for that, those applications they're going to make further down the line. So I'd also like to welcome our staff and students. Students are in the YouTube channel viewing there, and I'd like to encourage you to put any questions into the chat function there, and we'll pick those up and they'll be streamed through so we can ask the employers those questions as we go. Our staff and colleagues are with us here in Zoom. So we will engage in a discussion after the presentations that will follow. So I'd just like to hand over very briefly to Zan Gunn, our Director of Planning, to say a few words, and then I'll give a little bit more detail about this session. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Zan Gunn. I'm Director of Planning in the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape. I just really wanted to echo sort of Teresa's views to thank everybody very much for putting this event on. They're extraordinary times. You're finding extraordinary new ways to do things which we used to do in a normal fashion in a room. And thank you all for all of your creativity in finding a way to set this up and a continuing interest to us all setting it up. Can I particularly thank Teresa, Sarah, Alison, others for the work that you've done in organising this and putting it together and making it happen. Can I thank all of the organisations? Teresa's run through them all already, but can I thank you all for showing a continued interest with us over this time. It's wonderful actually to see how you remain committed to us, whatever's happening, and in such sort of difficult circumstances, you're still thinking about sort of what we're doing and what our students are doing. So thank you very much for that. Can I also thank the students themselves for coming along, those of you who have come along to do this. Really, this is sort of a session for you, and it's you guys who make it worthwhile. And so when you show an interest, it's really helpful for us. So thank you, all of you, for your contribution too. So really, I think that that's all I really wanted to say at this stage. I'll hand over because I know we've got a lot to get through, and other people will be more interesting than me on what needs to be said more meaningfully. But I just did want to make sure that everybody knew how much we all appreciated their efforts towards us. So thank you.
And thank you, Zan. That's great to hear. So the provocation I pulled together for this afternoon session wanted to make it relevant really for all the audience and participants, thinking about how we best prepare for planning employment. So to address that, we need to start thinking about what is actually happening in the planning sector at the moment, and that's really going to be very helpful for us to get that insight from you as employers and employees. and getting that insight from an alumni's point of view of how you are experiencing it, sort of not being that far out of university, out of qualifying, and how you're sort of seeing the planning world unfold. And I must stress at this point, I know that you're not all alumni, and I think that is actually much even more meaningful, because I think, you know, some of you have really worked with us over the last couple of years, and as young people, young professionals, you almost become sort of adoptive alumni, and you know, you're very welcome to be part of that community, and we will benefit from your inputs. So thank you for you know, sort of becoming part of what we're trying to offer here. So we also want to look at how employers are adapting and planning for the future as we start to speculate what that might look like, and thinking also how the School of Planning at Newcastle can also take on board what is needed and start to address, you know, sort of plan for the future in terms of its teaching and research. So I'm going to now invite various speakers from the different employers, and just as a sort of means of us communicating as we go, it'd be helpful if you could, after the speakers have all said their sort of few minutes each, we'll start and go into the question and answer session, is to use the blue hand at that point. But I'll remind you again when we get to that. So I haven't really sort of picked a particular order for any reason, but I hope you won't feel picked upon, all those that have offered to say something. So if I could start by inviting Isabel Warren from Pegasus Group to say a few words about your experience, you know, sort of linking your undergraduate training with what you're doing now, and you know, sort of what advice perhaps you sort of can share with our students. So Isabel's urban designer. Inviting Isabel Warren from Pegasus Group to say a few words about your experience.
You've got an echo there. So yeah, so I've been working for Pegasus Group for 3 years, and I graduated from Sheffield University, having done a BA in geography, and then I followed on with an MA in urban design and planning. Yeah, I think I started off with geography just out of pure interest of the built environment, and it really gave me the conceptual framework for underpinning designing places for people, and has benefited me with a more holistic perspective, and allowed me to understand places and the built environment through a social and economic and political lens, which I think a lot of designers don't necessarily have as their starting point. And on top of kind of learning about the built environment and balancing our needs of urbanisation and the natural environment, I think the skills that geography gave me were really beneficial to me, moving on to urban design as well. So the master's was a bit more applied. I could draw upon my previous skills to, in a more tangible way, creating design proposals, and then yeah, that ties maybe more closely to what I'm doing now. So currently I'm working on concept plans, where I'm conducting site appraisals, and so it's the initial stages of a project and seeing what the site potential is, but also assessing what's currently there, the constraints and opportunities. And so a lot of those analytical skills go into that, and having the creativity to create something, to create a place for people, for both new and existing residents, yeah, I think it's something that's blends the design side and the more kind of conceptual side, and yeah, it's been quite nice to tie those together.
Thank you very much, Isabel. That's a really nice way of summing up how you've got to where you have at the moment, and sort of knitting together those skills and knowledge. Rather than take questions sort of in between speakers, if I could just then move on to Charlotte Connor, would you be able to share your thoughts so far? Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Charlotte. I currently work for Pegasus Group in the Newcastle office alongside studying the Urban Planners Masters at Newcastle. So in terms of applying the skills that I've learned from university in my undergrad in geography and the Masters now to the work I'm currently working on, I'm currently working on a number of planning applications for an affordable housing provider. So I think the initial stage of this process included public consultation. So having that awareness of the impact that people have on space from geography and the understanding of stakeholder engagement from the Masters was really useful, and to help inform exactly who to consult, not only so you could improve their knowledge of the proposals, but also they could help improve and give their opinions to improve the proposals themselves. As well, a lot of my work involves report writing, and I think it's really useful to have the sort of planning knowledge that we gain from the university on sustainability and like economics to apply to the assessment of proposals against planning policy and material considerations, because through synthesizing that material, it kind of gives us a good base to form an argument. For example, working on the affordable development side of things at present, learning about the key challenges in the UK housing market, such as affordability, has definitely helped me in that perspective. But not only on particular knowledge that I've learned at university, I think the way in which the university operates, obviously we have a number of modules and deadlines that are conflicting, and that's very similar to practice. You've got to be able to manage your workloads effectively to meet deadlines, and also I think it's key to communicate if you're struggling or if you fail to understand something. It's really important just to get it out there and let someone know.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's a very practical approach. I'm sure we can all learn something from that. And communication is key, isn't it, in whatever. So brilliant, thank you. Next, Libby, would you be able to share that sort of transition and where you are, what you've drawn on? Thank you.
Yep. So hi guys, now my name is Libby Gibson. I sit in the ARUP Newcastle office within the Planning, Policy and Economics team. So I graduated from Sheffield as well 4 years ago, doing the MPlan Urban Studies and Planning course. So I've always done planning instead of sort of converting over from geography into a master's. So sort of from the start of my degree, much as you guys will be doing on your MPlan, I've been training for practice. And I think when I was sort of thinking about what to include within my speech, the main thing I could think of was the developing your understanding that you're part of a bigger process within planning, and sort of getting that you are maybe working at the start of the process, or you're maybe working at the end of the process, but you always have to work within a wider team and kind of see the wider outcomes for lots of different people, because the type of jobs you're going to be working on aren't just going to impact people like us or certain different demographics of society. You're going to be impacting lots of different demographics. So I think that's something that definitely comes through in your studies, particularly with an MPlan, because you're working on so many different subjects and you're understanding the different types of problems that people have to deal with. I think that was sort of my main point on top of what you guys had already mentioned so far. I think for me, a current job that I'm working on that reflects that, I'm working for Highways England on a road called the A66, which runs from Scotch Corner on the A1 right across to the M6 near Manchester. And we're doing a whole load of dualling of that road, which is currently a single carriageway. So for that, you would think, well, there's only certain, there's people who use that road and there's people that don't use that road, and who's impacted and what happens. But there's obviously so many people that are affected by something like that. And us as planners, we have to try and figure out which communities are going to be most impacted on, how we can build things to have the least impact. And I think that's been reflected in my work so far, because I'm, from using my planning background, I'm working on the human health assessment, I'm doing stakeholder engagement, I'm doing public consultation, and I'm also going to be doing the development consent order when we do actually apply and submit this to the government. So I think it's what initially can just come in as a planning skill can turn into a much larger development skill, and it's developing those different sort of competencies and understanding where you fit into the development process, which is what I think I got most from my MPLAN. I think it's me.
And thank you very much. Exciting project to be involved in, and yeah, it's interesting how much you're learning even in such a short space of time. So thank you very much for that. Great. Next, could I go to Victoria? And Victoria's with David Locks.
Thanks, Teresa. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria. I'm an assistant planner at David Lock Associates, who are a multidisciplinary town planning and urban design consultancy based in Milton Keynes. They're quite well known for their long-standing involvement in large-scale strategic development and growth. So I've been at DLA for just over 2 years now, and I've just submitted my EPC. So I'm hoping to become a chartered planner by the end of the year. Fingers crossed. Can't believe I've just said that on YouTube. Probably shouldn't have said that. I should have kept that to myself. So I studied my undergraduate degree in geography at Lancaster University, and then I moved to Sheffield to do my 1-year full-time master's in town and regional planning at the University of Sheffield. So there's some more details about the kinds of projects that I'm involved with in our video that we put together for the Spotlight Week. And the examples that I've used are work that we've done for a small house builder, so schemes of kind of like 10 homes or less, but then also up to a larger scale scheme, which is a sustainable urban extension east of Kettering, which is up to 5,500 homes and associated complementary land uses. So I had a bit of a think about how my planning masters in particular has influenced my experience in kind of current day-to-day activities. So I think the first thing that came to mind was I always thought the planning law module was the most useful thing that I studied at university, because the planning system in legal terms is something that all planners use every day. So I think sometimes we don't really realise it's second nature. So one of the things when I first started working in practice that was almost drilled into me a little bit was Section 38, Part 6 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, that all decisions have to be made in accordance with the development plan unless the material considerations indicate otherwise. So every time I'm making a planning application, I kind of think this is going to be the starting point for the planning officer. So when I'm writing a planning statement, I'm trying to convey to that case officer why the proposed development is going to be in accordance with the development plan, or if it isn't, why we think that material considerations could indicate that they should still approve it. We did an integrated project as well during my master's, which we had to work on a particular plot in Sheffield and use the urban design skills that we'd learned and come up with a planning strategy as well. So I think this prepared me to try and work with other consultants. So all applications are kind of supported by a lot of relevant reports from others, such as like ecologists and engineers and transport planners and sometimes lawyers and that sort of thing. And I've also built upon the urban design skills that I learned as well a little bit, because we're often involved at Kettering to provide comments upon different parcel layouts being brought forward by different house builders in the interests of our client, just to make sure that everything is in accordance with the wider development. Other modules that I thought weren't directly applicable to everyday practice, but were actually really helpful for kind of baseline context and understanding things more based on the theory, history and ethics of planning. So professionalism is obviously really important to the organisation that you'll be working for, and the RTPI and the ideal values of planners all come from the theory that lies behind planning and acting in the public interest and that sort of thing. The last kind of skill I thought about was that non-planning skills learned at university are also really important. So things that Charlotte touched upon, like written communication skills. A lot of my days are spent writing letters and reports, which need to be all clear and concise. And research skills are obviously really well rehearsed and well taught at university. And there's always an element of research involved in planning, because some council websites are much more difficult to navigate than others, which sometimes can feel like a bit of a research task in itself. So overall, I'd say that in my case, I found that university prepared me fairly well for my first graduate job, but a lot of knowledge and skills that I've used and have been developed at work. So I think one recommendation I'd make is that you'd be at a great advantage if you have a good amount and breadth of work experience, so that you can have a bit of a head start when you actually do start work. Obviously, it looks good on your CV and any applications, but also, as Libby was saying, it helps you to kind of orientate yourself within the planning system and understand where you might like to kind of fit yourself and your career within that as well. So that was it. Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, Victoria. Some great tips there. And I'm sure that will come up in the questions later about, sort of taking the next step, bridging the gap between studies and work itself. So thank you very much. Right, okay, so next could I ask Emily from Lichfields, would you be able to share a few words, please?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Thompson from Lichfields. I did geography as my undergraduate at Northumbria, and then I did my master's in town planning, and I graduated in July 2018, so a couple of years ago now. What everyone said so far has basically captured everything that I was going to say, so I'm kind of repeating it, but I thought I would talk about an example of work that I have been involved in since February 2019. So basically from when I started, and now planning committee is in December. So I've been involved from the outset. So the example I thought I'd talk about is in Berwick Infirmary, the redevelopment of the hospital up in Berwick-upon-Tweed. My role in that was starting off with the initial site appraisals, looking at alternative sites on behalf of the trust, the NHS Foundation Trust, to see if there's any suitable sites in and around Berwick. And it was concluded that we would use the existing site, although the numerous constraints and planning issues that are associated with that site. If you know where Berwick Infirmary is, it's located in a conservation area surrounded by Berwick Town Wall, residential amenity, there's parking issues, the list goes on. Anyway, so we went down that route, we've gone with it, stayed with the site, and throughout the whole process, the Trust and Lichfields have continued community engagement from the outset throughout. At the beginning, it started off with the Trust involving employees and local people in the nearby neighbourhood. And then when Lichfields started getting involved, we conducted an online consultation event due to current circumstances, and that was really successful by using a website. After that, we had to conduct an environmental impact assessment because of all the technical constraints associated with the site. So looking back on my university course at Newcastle, the planning law module was particularly helpful with that because, as Victoria mentioned earlier, planning law is essential to what we do, and you have to look at legislation, and it's very procedural, especially environmental impact assessment. There's a lot of boxes you need to tick, and looking at all the cumulative effects and the mitigation associated with that. So yeah, looking back on that module, it really helped me understand the basic principles of an environmental impact assessment and the wider context that has. So we conducted all of that, and then we submitted the planning application, and I have been involved in liaising directly with the council and working with the project team, responding to statutory consultee comments, and working as a team to achieve an outcome. So like Libby said, there's all these different elements within the planning system, and I think the Berwick Infirmary has been a good example of everyone working together to achieve a goal. So working with Historic England and the Environment Agency and highways, all to get an acceptable development on a highly constrained site. So now the planning application is going to committee in December, so fingers crossed, everyone. But yeah, overall, looking back on my master's, planning law has definitely been extremely helpful. And also I remember the reflective practitioner module. I think, I don't know if we still do that, but this scheme in particular, there's been a lot of issues with residents and daylight and sunlight and conservation and heritage. It's definitely helped me look at the bigger picture, and not just from a planning point of view. You need to look at the public and how they see it, and how a conservation officer might see it. And it's been all about working as a team to reach a goal. Yeah. Okay,
brilliant. Thank you, Emily. And that's when you start taking your perspective sort of out of that sort of environmental bit and starting to see it through other professionals and the public's point of view, that's sort of a real sort of honing of skills, isn't it? So that's a lovely example to use. Thank you very much. Okay, so that leaves me, Jo, would you like to say a little bit about the masters, that how that might have prepared you for your current role or other roles, and anything you wanted to add about the RTPI as well? Not necessarily if you're not prepared for that.
Thanks, Teresa. Jo Ridgeon. I'm a director with Headley Planning, and I'm also the chair of the Member and Public Relations Committee, which is part of the regional RTPI structure. And what I do as part of that role is organise social events, member engagement, whether that's getting them involved with the other sort of planning societies and things like that. And we also organise and run the awards. And just a little plug for that, they're on at 4 o'clock today. So also on YouTube if you want to have a look at that. In terms of university, I did geography at undergrad, and then I did the 1-year master's course. I think looking back, the thing that you sort of don't probably appreciate the value of is the sort of theoretical underpinnings, the sort of that element of it, which seems a bit flaky for want of a better word. And then you look back on it in 10 years time and you're like, that's what they were all going on about, and it gets put into context. So that's quite an important point I'd like to stress in terms of those things that don't quite seem important at the moment. As you go through your career, that becomes more important. In terms of skills, obviously you get that sort of introduction to the sort of policy context, the law, legal context, the sort of development management side of it, but also the sort of collaboration, the public participation, how democracy and politicians work into the planning system. And that's very much something that as you go through your career and you get more involved in the politics of it, that becomes more important to sort of understand how planning fits, and it's not a black and white answer, unfortunately, or fortunately if you work in the private sector, because that gives you a job to do basically. So in terms of the RTPI, I got involved from the get-go when I started in planning, and I think sort of do a plug for that. Get involved in the young planners. Sorry, just someone's calling me. Get involved in the young planners. Get involved in everything that they do, and also get involved in the sort of events that are held. The reason for that is planning is collaborative. You will meet people at those events, which you will work with throughout your career. As everyone grows in different jobs and different roles, you'll come across people time and time again. And if you start those relationships early, that's a good opportunity to get to meet people and know people, and those connections are really helpful in the future. So that also networking is quite important in the planning role, when you're talking about negotiating planning decisions and balancing different and competing interests. I think that's something that in the early days, getting involved in the RTPI and building those soft networking skills is something that will pay dividends further into your career. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. Brilliant. So we've had a whole array of experiences and current perspectives. I think probably you could sort of multiply that up and everybody would have a very different, very unique sort of package of how they've worked, used their knowledge from their training and in the situation that they're working in on whichever projects. So, and that's the wonderful thing I feel about the planning profession, that, you know, the variety of the niches that you can actually find to put yourself into. So on that basis, I'd like to just throw open the doors to any questions that any of the audiences have. If you're a student and looking at this through YouTube, then put your questions into the chat if you type them in there. Equally, we could have questions in the chat in Zoom, and we can ask those, or if you just actually, because we were not a massive audience in Zoom, I think if you just put your hand up, then we can just come to you and you can ask the question for yourself rather than me or somebody else having to do that. So would anybody like to start the ball rolling?
If everyone else has been shy, I'll start.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
One of the things that has happened to my career is that I've worked in quite a lot of different types of roles. So I started in a law firm, in a planning team. I then worked in a council on secondment. Then I went and worked for a surveying firm, and then I was a strategic land manager at a developer, and then I finally found myself as a planning consultant in a planning practice. So I think that range is quite interesting and has come across lots of different people. So it'd be interesting to hear what the other guys have done in terms of different roles or come across different types of planning jobs that you can do.
Would anybody like to pick up on that? Other roles that you've been involved in? Excuse me.
I can do a little bit on that. So for me, I graduated 4 years ago, so I've worked for Arup, but within my role for Arup, I've worked in 2 separate offices. So I suppose that's maybe a little bit of a change, maybe not as much, but working for maybe different local authorities, looking at different things. And I've also spent some time sort of on like a half-time secondment for HS2 Limited for the railway, and I've also currently seconded to the Environment Agency. So I think there's a point as well within one role that you might have, and it looks like you maybe are just doing one job. You've got so many different clients and different opportunities to see things from different perspectives as well. So I think that's my main point on that.
Do you find that there has been a time when you've realised you're thinking about something completely differently in that different role?
100%, yeah. I definitely feel like from my most recent one, I'm working on flood risk applications that I never ever would have looked at before doing this role. So I suppose that's something that I only started in August. So it's constantly changing. Things that you think you might be working on this year, you don't end up working on, and then you end up working on something completely different. So I suppose it's that diversity, isn't it, for who you, depending on what hat you've got on that day.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here, Teresa?
Yes, please. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, I was just thinking that this is one of the many values of the year out in practice for Newcastle MPlan students, because, for example, if you go to work for a local authority, it's traditional, or seems to be this way, that you kind of spend a block in development management. You might spend a block in a sort of forward planning unit. You might find yourself in an economic development unit or a kind of special projects or something. So what you're doing through that, if you want, taster menu, is not only picking up a range of skills and getting lots of different perspectives on what is planning, which is, you know, too big to encompass. But I think you're also getting some idea about, is this the kind of planning that I would want to do? Is it at the pace I want? Is it researchy enough? Is there enough action in it? Is there enough whatever? So you begin to, if you want, test your own, not only skills, but the things that drive you against the experiences of the everyday. But I also think that when jobs come up, if you've had those kinds of diverse experiences, what you're able to do is to look at the opportunity and think, right, I've had that. So if you want, you can major and minor through your experiences and make yourself, if you want, you know, look appropriate to that kind of role. And of course, for some year outs, you can come away thinking, I never, ever, ever want to do that. But then you've learned a great deal about yourself, about the kind of things which drive you and the kind of things where you think, oh, forget it, just don't take me there. But, you know, it's all about learning about yourself, isn't it? The things which give you satisfaction. And I think we all want that. Nobody, I think, wants to just shuffle paper from one end of their desk to another.
Can I just add on to that? Within urban design, what I wasn't aware of before starting the job is there's quite a lot of range within the career. So there's a very technical end where you're producing reserved matters drawings with, it could be a small scheme or a massive scheme with like 1,000 houses and community spaces and like primary schools and things like that. And you're kind of assisting on creating all of these very detailed drawings, or on the complete other end of the spectrum, it can be very conceptual based on your design principles, where you kind of are able to be a bit more creative and maybe a bit more idealistic in some ways. And it's kind of like you kind of move between the two constantly, but then you can kind of specialize within one side or do both even. And I think that does really add a lot of interest into the career. And of course, like with more technical stuff, they don't expect you to come straight out of uni and be able to kind of smash out a layout. Yeah, you do learn a lot on the job in terms of software.
That's very reassuring, and I think there's that fine balance between being worried about what am I expected to know and be able to do, and just being open to learning and having that right attitude. So that's great to hear those perspectives. Sander, did you have something you wanted to chip in there with?
I did have a question, but it's kind of already been answered. It was really, I'll ask it anyway. It was really interesting to hear about what you're doing now, and you know, what you enjoyed from your planning degrees across the country. I was just kind of related to what Isabel said. Is there any parts of your planning degree that you, looking back on your planning degree, what could your planning degree given to you that you wish you had had? You know, how can a planning degree better prepare you for work? Can it prepare you for work? Are there skills that you were asked to do, or things that you're asked to do and you were like, I've got absolutely no idea what to do? You know, how can the planning degree be changed to better equip you for skills that you might need? Thank you.
Thanks, Sander. Anybody like to pick that one up?
I'll go.
Go on, Emily.
This might seem a bit simple, but perhaps looking at the various types of planning applications from a more practical point of view, going through the difference between an advertisement consent, discharge of condition, reserved matters, full planning application, outline planning application. I just remember starting at work and not really knowing discharge of conditions. I knew the idea of discharge of conditions, but I felt like I didn't know the full details, so I had to learn that. Yeah, that's quite a simple one. that would have helped me, I think.
And did you feel that that took you a while to learn when you're in practice?
It's just something that you pick up through experience. I think after you've done one discharge of condition application, you're quite on the way. But yeah, from my experience, I didn't have any planning work experience before I got my job role. So I was starting completely from scratch. And maybe if the university course is a bit more practical, that might have been a bit different for me, but yeah.
Thank you. It's something to think about if securing experience could be more challenging, and how we integrate that into what we teach. So thank you for that comment. I noticed, George, did you want to say something, or was that sort of to contribute to that, or something
Yeah,
new?
I wanted to add something as well. Hello, my name is Georgiana Varna. I'm responsible for the final year of Masters of Planning. So after, usually after the students go for 1 year placement, and I had just 2 questions that kind of came from my discussions with the current cohort recently. So related to the diversity of jobs, if it'd be nice if you could comment a bit of your experience both in the planning and private sector, and a bit what, if you are in one of them, what drove you to it? Because some of my students are still a bit confused, let's say, or they don't really know which one to choose as a beginning career. And the second one, maybe a bit, we changed a lot of our practices being on Zoom right now, but also with using Teams and online communication environment. So I was wondering if you could reflect a bit on how your job changed in the past 6 months, as we are trying now to prepare our students to the future of planning, which no one knows. But it would be nice to hear a bit how this digitalization kind of, what would they expect, when they go in soon. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Who would like to address that one? Joe, thank you.
Yeah, just on that one, I'll probably advocate getting an experience of both if you can. I was very lucky in my early career that I got a chance to do a 12-month secondment in a local authority. They are quite different in terms of your pressures and how it works, and in some respects it's a personality fit in some respects. But I suppose going back to what we were discussing before, there's such a wide range of roles both in the public and private sector that it's not necessarily a straightforward dichotomy. You can do different things in those jobs. So get a bit of experience from both in terms of having my RTPI hat on. It's known what jobs are out there in the first instance, and I think if you go to the networking events and things like that, you'll get an idea of what roles are out there. Like in the Northeast, you've got the Environment Agency, you've also got the MMO, which is the Marine Management Organisation, and things like that, where you probably think about it as, I can go to public or private, but it's a lot more varied than that. So it's if you can get experience of a wider range, I think that would be definitely a good thing. And then just in terms of the second question, recent changes, it's just awful. I hate being on Zoom all the time. That sort of interaction with people is a big part of planning and getting to meet people and talk to people and all that side of things. Virtual planning committees just painful, to be honest. But we've adapted to it, and obviously one of the things that we have done, and is actually with Place Changers, who we've been working with, is doing that sort of public consultation, doing online consultation. And I think in the future we have been talking to clients, especially sort of house builders and things like that, where in the future there'll have to be more of a mix. It won't be good enough to just have your one afternoon in a church hall somewhere and invite people. You will have to do that sort of online and in-person consultation. I think that's going to be a big change for the industry.
Thank you very much, Joe. Yeah, we had no choice of, this was thrust upon us, and the adaptation that we've had to go through, we haven't even been able to take stock yet, but great example of what you were preparing to do with place changes and now rolling that out. So I think we'll hear some more about that in the future. We have had a question from the YouTube chat, and if I can just access that, I think is from Jeff, Jeff Igar. Hi there in YouTube, Jeff. So he's saying, what scheme or project or achievement are you all most proud of so far in your careers? Who would like to go first with that? Thank you, Jeff, for the question.
I'll have a little go. So as part of the East Kettering project, the outline consent was kind of running out in March, back when Corona sort of first happened. Everyone came to work from home, and we needed to submit a reserve matters application for a really small substation to help power one of the new residential parcels that was coming forward. And the outline application had expired, so we couldn't do a reserve matters, and we had to do a full application. And because of the relationship with the wider development, the local planning authority requested an environmental EIA screening, which we submitted, which was a really long process for a really, really small substation. And long story short, it took us maybe 6 months to get planning approval for a really, really small electricity substation. But that was something that I'd been able to kind of take as my own little project and had completely kind of run that independently. And I think partly because it took so long, but also because there was quite a lot of different elements involved. That sounds a bit pathetic that I'm most proud of a substation, but I've informally requested a blue plaque on the side of it, but I'm not sure that I'm going to get that, unfortunately.
And I think that highlights nicely this sort of timescale thing that, it's, I suppose, the same as in consultation, those quick wins, although they probably won't have seemed very easy, but, just seeing change and achievement, it's good, whilst other projects are perhaps a little bit longer in length. But that's great, really sort of clear example. Anybody else want to?
Can I jump in there just in terms of timescales? I put a site forward for residential development in 2010. It was in the green belt, took it through local plan process, got an outline application approved, then a reserve matters, and then we scrapped all that and did a planning application. And last week I drove past the site and saw some diggers on it. So 10 years in the making, and it's probably got about another 7 or 8 years to build out as well. So yeah, long time scales in planning. And Victoria, I know it took you 6 months, but you get the same satisfaction when it takes even longer. It's just it can be a long time, but yeah, delayed gratification, I think, is the word. Psychologically, that's the best type of gratification. So yeah.
Excellent. And they don't have to be the fanciest projects, but that they were very involved at the time. I'm going to try and sort of not comment too much, because it's making me think of lots of projects that I've seen come and go that I've been involved in the past. Okay, we've got a question from Paula, and she's asking if, in your experiences so far, to what extent have you been able to help shape professional practices and businesses to take into account new and emerging challenges or emergencies? So yeah, that sort of shaping professional practice, have you felt you've been part of that process because of the sort of bigger agendas that are going on? Would you like me to read it again? Yeah. In your experiences so far, to what extent have you been able to help shape professional practices and businesses to take into account new and emerging challenges or emergencies. So where does your sort of own professional influence come into that, or to what extent has it come into that?
I think my examples, it's not necessarily a professional example, but it's kind of sitting alongside the planning profession, in that when we were all sent to work from home, we had some work experience students due to come down to the office in Milton Keynes. And unfortunately, obviously, we couldn't do that, but I was kind of quite instrumental in encouraging the partners within the company to think about doing a virtual work experience set up similar to this, Teams calls and presentations and that sort of thing. And I think we were one of the first companies that I knew of to be able to run a programme in July earlier this year, sorry. And so I was just really happy that we were still able to engage with students in what would have been a difficult time for them to get work experience and that sort of thing. And we're running another programme in January, and we had really good feedback from the last one, and some of our clients got involved, and we're really happy that we were also reaching out to support students as well in that learning process. So it's not necessarily a professional example, but kind of taking into account how we kind of operated, because at the moment we're very kind of office focused, but I think there is space for more virtual learning and engagement as well.
And how did your colleagues respond to that? Was there a willingness, reluctance, or just sort of see how it goes?
I think they were mostly see how it goes. I think at first it was a bit like, oh, well, how are we going to do that? Because obviously we were doing our virtual meetings professionally, but it wasn't necessarily clear. We were all quite new to the Zoom software and all that sort of thing then. And how were we actually going to run things and be able to kind of have interactive events so that students weren't literally sat listening to us for a week, which would have been, I'm sure, very boring for them. So we kind of tried to make some interactive workshops and presentations, and then provide feedback afterwards by email or in another virtual meeting. So yeah, I think it was more, we'll see how it goes, but they've definitely taken on that kind of more wholeheartedly, and know that we're going to be able to continue to run these programs in the future, which has been really great.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I can see a couple of questions floating through my screen, so I'll try and find those as well. If I can just flag up, and maybe as we'll wrap up this session, I wonder if I could ask you, after I've come back to these questions, perhaps one tip that you would give our students thinking about, the lack of, perhaps a lack of work experience, so that short-term vacation experience, or maybe you know better about that. But what one tip could you say to those wanting to go into a planning profession, and sort of thinking, how can I best enhance my CV perhaps, and sort of present myself professionally? So I'm just going to go to Armel's question, and she's asking, can you give advice regarding how to start when applying for a placement or position? And how would you do that? Would that be through sending a letter, a portfolio of work? So, what is in your experience is the best way that either you went through, or I'm not sure this is something that maybe Grace could answer. So from the HR point of view, you see applicants perhaps with different approaches, depending on whether it's urban design or planning. What would you recommend?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Grace Maguire. I work at Pegasus Group, so I work in the HR team. Yeah, really, really important question to ask, really, to be able to get some insight into what a good application looks like when applying. What we tend to look at is, a cover letter goes a long way. So to be able to include as much detail on that about yourself, about the discipline that you're applying for, whether that's planning or urban design or environment, such as, just so we can get a better understanding that what you can demonstrate that you understand about what you've learned, for example, at university, for what you've studied, and how that's relevant to the discipline that you are applying for as well. Also, you know, if it shows your commitment to that particular route as well, that also goes a long way to show that you're quite passionate to go forward within that as a career. That's more so probably on the graduate side if you're looking to apply for graduate roles, but obviously it does help as well with placements. There were some good tips that were mentioned earlier about placements. We think it's a really valuable thing to move forward with, because that can give you a real grounding as to, is this the route that you want to go down? And it will also help you going forward when applying for roles as well when you leave university, because it gives you that solid foundation to build on to then move forward in your career. So a CV and a cover letter definitely goes a long way when applying. A portfolio of work would be also great. Obviously, if you're going down the design route and you have that portfolio of work behind you, that demonstrates a lot as well, that your skills that you have in that area, to be able to pick up on that also. Other things probably to consider as well, you know, what other skills do you have? You know, is there any leadership qualities that you might have been able to demonstrate in your studies or outside of your studies? So, you know, there could be particular hobbies or extracurricular activities outside of work or study that shows either getting involved in the community or leading on a project. Those are sort of things as well that would help in your career moving forward anyway, also as well. So hopefully that's given a little bit more of an insight for you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Grace, for that. Yes, you are the person on the other end of the applications, aren't you? So if they get past you, then you're the right person to give that advice. Thank you very much. Right, so I think we can start to wrap up a little bit. And if I could go around and ask, or if you just want to volunteer, if you could offer that one tip to our students watching, and something maybe, you know, if we need to take that on board as a School of Planning, and tweaking things that we do and support that we offer, what would be your sort of concluding tip for sort of successful progress into a planning career? Anybody like to start with that?
I'll go. I think for me, the one thing was to just give everything a go. So even when you're studying, if you think that you want to be private, or you think you want to go into local authority, or you're not sure what you want to do, I still did public sector placements when I was at uni. And I think that's really helpful, because you might think that you specifically want to be involved in one area, but you don't really know that maybe when you're studying. And it's kind of also when you're applying for stuff shows that you have tried other things and you do have that wider understanding.
Great, thank you very much, Libby. Rose, did you want to add something there?
Yes, I just wanted to jump in and say that I think one of the things that life teaches you is that nothing is wasted. I worked in local authority way back in the Jurassic era, but I got my first management post in housing, not because I had management experience within housing, but because I was the chair of a voluntary sector group. So if you've got skills and expertise outside of the job, you've got that skill and expertise. It doesn't have to be within that arena. And even if all you've ever done is, you know, you've worked in a bar, you think, right, you have possibly managed a team, you have kept your cool when you've got rowdy customers, you know, you can work under pressure. There's an awful lot of transferable skills can be found in all of those. Oh, but it's just a weekend job or something. You think, no, it isn't. You can squeeze the pips out of that and prove to an employer that you've got a range of life and transferable skills.
Thank you, Rose. And I think it's important to say, even in sort of remote working in digital times, that those volunteer roles are still there, and may need to look for them a little bit harder, but it doesn't mean that we're not needed as volunteers. So definitely sort of echo what you've said. Brilliant. Thank you. Joe,
Yeah, just to echo that again in terms of the volunteering and getting involved in that local RTPI, the young planners I know are quite active in the region, and there's also the sort of the regional activity and policy committee and various committees that you can get involved in, also the University Planning Society. And I think it's not just a case of joining and then putting that on your CV. You want to get involved, how to be in a meeting, how to run a meeting if you want to become a treasurer or the chair of that group. All of those things show that you can engage in sort of the skills that you need to work, and also networking. As I said at the beginning, that's an important skill in terms of entirely transferable to your day-to-day planning career. The other thing that I've seen when people have been looking at CVs is going and doing things that you don't know anything about. I think Emily mentioned it earlier, not knowing what a discharge condition. We have people not knowing what a planning committee is and things like that. Nowadays, it's really straightforward to be able to go online, watch a planning committee. You can watch examinations in public. You can watch public inquiries. You can get an understanding of what's going on. And then when you're sitting in an interview, probably online at the moment, you can sort of talk about that and show that you and demonstrate that you understand that process. So that would be really useful as well.
Thanks, Joe. Some really practical tips. And it's great to hear from somebody who's on the selection side as well. You know that what makes a candidate stand out a little bit more than the others. Thank you. Anybody else like to offer? Yeah, Charlotte?
Oh, sorry, Emily.
Sorry, Emily.
You go, Charlotte.
Go. Oh gosh. Okay.
Okay.
I was just going to say, obviously, with the digitalization of planning and things, there's a lot more things available for people to watch, like the RTPI have the free CPD events. So I know as a student, you get your student membership. So watch those, get an insight into different things that we might not be taught at university, because that's something you could also put on sort of your CV and just build your own knowledge. And as well, I think LinkedIn's a good platform. Just message people and ask questions if you've got them. It's a good way to find out information, and I'm sure a lot of people would be more than happy to share their experiences.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Excellent. Yeah, and we've got a lot of other alumni pre-recorded sessions on the YouTube channel, and a lot of those we've reached out through LinkedIn and are sort of saying very similar messages as well in terms of just that networking that's available there. Thank you very much. Emily, thank you.
Yeah. I was just going to follow on from Joe. He was mentioning about the Young Planners Committee. Libby and I are both on the Young Planners Committee and for the Northeast, and we have a virtual quiz next Wednesday. If any student would like to join, you can go on the RTPI website. You can sign up if you're a member or a non-member. Normally it's a curry and quiz night at the pub, but unfortunately online.
Bring your own curry.
Yeah, bring your own curry.
Excellent, thanks for that plug. Yeah, those subtle little steps, getting to know what's happening in the area, building up those contacts, really good tips, thank you. Anybody that wanted to say something but hasn't? I've not given a chance. So I think I'm just going to ask Danny just to wrap up with any sort of overarching thoughts from the session, and then I'll just jump in at the end, and I think we're almost done.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Teresa. Firstly, I think it's been really interesting, and it's been fascinating to compare the trajectory of some of the people who've spoken today to some of the things that people like myself have done, and how we've got to where we are. Because there's quite a lot of similarity, and especially that issue of sort of chasing a bit of diversity in your career, I think is a really positive outlook. In terms of the sort of issues that emerged, I thought there was a bit of clear read through from the core content of the courses, and planning law got a bit of a mention a couple of times. But Emily did make the mention of the opportunity to work through applications in a practical sense. And that's something I'm going to have a little bit of a think about for the material that I teach. So that was a really interesting thing. Also the mention of more generic skills, research and report writing. I major quite heavily on that in my material because, you know, I expect it to be very useful, more generic skill. And it's great to hear that that's the case. And the points that Grace made about that in terms of how you represent those, I think is also very interesting. The complexity of the work I thought was a very interesting and intuitive point to raise. And the mention of the planning of the dualling of the A66 from Libby was really good because, yes, I would have said that's a relatively straightforward process, but then you start to think it through and you think of all the layers of all of that, and the comments that Emily made about Berwick Infirmary and being part of a bigger process was also very powerful as well. And then the comments that both Victoria and Joe made about responding to these new realities and delivering things like work experience in these new ways. It was very good there, I thought, to get two different ends of the spectrum because I'm a little bit like you, Joe. I don't like doing things this way. I like to be face to face with people. But it was interesting to hear Victoria's comments on just how to push that through sort of thing. And then the final thing which jumped out at me was the comments that were made about job satisfaction. So Joe talked about getting that site away and going past and seeing the site being developed. But obviously after this, my first priority is to go and launch the campaign for Victoria's blue plaque at the substation. I think we need to get that whole process going. But joking aside, and I think Rose made a comment about this, you do take huge satisfaction sometimes in what other people might class as relatively minor things. But the truth is we're constantly building the society and the environment around us. And sometimes the smallest parts of that can be hugely significant. And so taking job satisfaction from those things, I think, is a really positive, and it's a really powerful way to think about the role of planners in our society, which is hugely significant and very, very important.
Thank you very much, Danny. And no doubt your APC application will be following quickly as well. So yeah, it's a great profession, and lovely to hear all your experiences so far, and we wish you well, and do keep in touch, and you know, work with us, let us know how you're getting on, if anything you think might be useful for our students to know about, any sort of forums that are being shared that people can join virtually or otherwise. Hopefully we'll get back to sort of doing things in person before long, but so yeah, that just really sort of thank you, and to maintain that contact, and thank you for giving up your time this afternoon, and it's been really great to hear what you're doing. It's really heartening, but also hopefully it's inspiring for our students as well. So yeah, thank you very much, and we'll probably be in touch at some point. If students want to contact you, perhaps I can just email you separately to see what the best way of doing that would be. I know LinkedIn is a good sort of neutral kind of way of doing that, but you know, I think that might be something that would follow on from this session, students actually wanting to have that sort of communication with you direct. So I'll be in touch about that. So that just requires me to wrap everything up now, and thank everybody for attending, and Alison and Sarah in the background just keeping everything all plugged in. Thank you, and we'll meet soon. So take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.